Good morning, everybody. To begin, could you please join me in Gassho? Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Today, because of the schedule for the rest of the day, we are doing things a little bit differently. We will begin with the English Dharma talk by Dr. Haneda, and then we'll have the service in between, and then at that time, after the service, Oshoko, the English-speaking people can go leave after doing Oshoko, and then the Japanese language people can stay, and we'll have a Japanese Dharma talk at that time. So it's a little different, kind of like what we were doing over the summer, except backwards. We used to have the Japanese first and such. But today, for our Eitaikyo service, the Eitaikyo is the perpetual memorial service, or actually, it's trying to ensure that we keep the sutras available for everybody in perpetuity, to try to keep it going on. So, like a lot of times with the Eitaikyo, they think of the donations right away, but then yes, the donations are there to help keep the teachings available. But it's also a time to reflect upon ourselves, what we've received from the Buddha Dharma, and how important it is to keep the Buddha Dharma going and available for all others as well. And for this service, we're very fortunate to have with us Dr. Nobuo Haneda as our guest speaker. Dr. Haneda is currently the head of the Maida Center in Berkeley. We're also very fortunate to have with him as his chauffeur, Mrs. Haneda, who is here to joining us this morning as well. But Dr. Haneda is really, a very interesting individual with an interesting life. A lot of things are kind of perplexing at times, number one, anybody that's a Russian literature major in college is kind of different for me. And then after that, he got into studying Buddhism, then came to the United States to study Buddhism, from Japan to the United States. And, Dr. Haneda has a lot of varied interests. He was talking to us about gardening this morning. He also knows a lot about soba because he comes from an area of Japan that's famous for their soba. So their buckwheat noodles and such. But, Dr. Haneda has a very varied background, and, he's taught at the Institute of Buddhist Studies, other institutions throughout the United States. He just recently got back from a lecturing tour in Japan. So coming from Japan to the United States to study Buddhism, and then being invited back to Japan, that's impressive too. So without any further ado, for this Eitaikyo service, we'd like to have you please give Dr. Haneda your attention. Thank you.
Namanda. Good morning, everyone. Sensei, thank you for introducing me. It's a tremendous honor for me to be invited here as a speaker for your Eitaikyo service. I've been to this temple many times, and first time I was invited here was like 25 years ago, and Reverend Tsumura was the Rinban at that time. And since then, Rinban, Inoue, Rinban, Ohata, Reverend Ken, invited me here. And I have so many friends here, and I have so many wonderful memories about this temple. But before I get into my main talk, I want to talk about one episode I've experienced. Some time ago, in a Buddhist conference, I met a gentleman, and this gentleman told me, Dr. Haneda, I attended your seminar held at the Stockton Buddhist Temple several years ago. And I remembered this seminar. I talked about Amida Buddha, very important topic in that seminar. So I asked this gentleman, do you remember something I said in that seminar? And this gentleman answered, Dr. Haneda, of course I remember something you said in the seminar. it's always nice to meet a good listener. So I asked him, then what do you remember? What did I say? Then he said, Dr. Haneda, you told us that BCA stands for Barbecue Chickens of America. You told us that Fujinkai and barbecue chickens are supporting the BCA. Then I asked him, do you remember something else I said? He said, no, that's the only thing I remember. So you see, it's not easy to be an impressive speaker, okay? So this morning I want you to remember something else I say, okay? Okay. This morning, I want to talk about how our Buddhist teachers, such as Shinran Shonin, read Buddhist scriptures. In our study of Buddhism, we often read Buddhist texts, and when we read Buddhist books, it's quite important to know that there are two ways of reading them. The first way is a general and objective way of reading, and the second way is a subjective and experiential way of reading. Our Buddhist teachers read Buddhist scriptures in the second way, in the subjective and experiential way. I believe the second way is an authentic Buddhist way of reading text. So this morning, I want to say that we must learn from our teachers this authentic way of reading Buddhist texts. When we start to study Buddhism, we initially read text in the first way, in a general and objective way, and we try to get information and try to learn about ideas and concepts. In the initial stage, we do not read the texts for the sake of examining the self. But as we advance on the Buddhist path, we realize that Buddhism is nothing but self-examination. Then we start to read the texts for examining the self, for knowing the self. We start to read the text not only for gaining information, but also for understanding the self. Since our Buddhist teachers often read texts in their unique ways, in unorthodox ways, scholars have criticized them. The scholars said that our teachers were reading text in an arbitrary way. Were the scholars justified in their criticism of our teachers? The answer is yes and no. The criticizers of our teachers were reading Buddhist texts in the first way, in a general and objective way, in an academic way. They were interested in knowing the standard meaning of the text. If their way is considered the right way of reading text, then we must say that our teachers were wrong in their way of reading Buddhist texts, because they are not necessarily interested in understanding the so-called standard meaning of the text. But it is important to know that our teachers were not interested in general and subjective and academic way of reading Buddhist texts. For them, Buddhism was nothing but self-examination, and they were interested in knowing the reality of the self. For them, Buddhist texts were a mirror that reflected and showed the reality of their beings. They wanted to know the reality of their beings that were being reflected in the mirror of the texts. Those texts were not only the source of academic and objective information, our teachers were also learning messages about the reality of the self. They were not hearing what the texts were saying generally. If we understand our teacher's perspective, we must say that there was nothing wrong with what our teachers were doing. So the scholars' criticism of our teachers was valid as far as their scholarly position was concerned. And there was nothing wrong with what our teachers were doing as far as their position was concerned. The criticizers and our teachers were dealing with the same Buddhist text from totally different perspectives. Now let me give you examples of the second way of reading Buddhist texts. I want to give you 3 instances in which our 3 teachers, Zendo, Shinran, and Dr. Iwao Hosokawa, read Buddhist texts in their own unique way, in their own subjective way. First, let me talk about Zendo. I will talk about how Zendo read Buddhist text. Zendo was a Chinese monk in the 7th century, and Shinran considered Zendo the 5th patriarch of the Shin Buddhist tradition. In one of his writings, Zendo comment on the 3 grades of people. One text talks about 3 grades of people, and Zendo comments on these 3 grades of people. A, B, C, 3 grades of people. And A is a high category of people who are capable of performing excellent practices. And B is the middle category of people who are capable of performing good practices, not excellent practices, but good practices. And C is a low category of people who cannot perform any good actions. C is a low category of people who commit all kinds of evil actions. All Chinese Pure Land scholars before Zendo said that the 3 grades of people showed an ethical path or ethical stages in which a practitioner should move upward from a lower stage of C to a higher stage of B and A by bettering themselves, by cultivating virtues. They read this as from C to B to A. But Zendo did not read the text same way. He read the text as showing the reality of himself. He read the 3 grades as a process of self-examination, as a process of gaining deeper insight into the evil and ignorance of his being. Zendo understood ABC opposite way. That is, he understood them as a process of moving from A to B, from B to C. This means that Zendo initially thought that he was an excellent human being belonging to the category of A. But through self-examination, Zendo gradually realized the depth of his evil and ignorance, and he identified himself with a lower type of person in B. And he eventually thought he was actually the evil person who belonged to the category of sea. This way, although all Buddhist scholars before Zendo read these three grays as ethical paths in which one should move from C to B, from B to A, Zendo read them in a totally opposite way, as a deepening process of self-examination, as a process of moving downward from A to B to C. The scholars of his time criticized Zendo for doing that. They thought Zendo was ridiculous. He was doing something so arbitrary. But Zendo was not interested in gaining the so-called academic understanding of the text. He was not interested in gaining merely objective and academic information of a text. Zendo was interested in knowing the reality of the self. He was interested in knowing the self that was shown by the Buddhist text. Now, let me discuss Shinran Shonin. Let me talk about how Shinran Shonin read the Buddhist text in his own unique way. Concerning the reading of one sentence in the larger sutra, there was a considerable difference between Shinran Shonin and the traditional Buddhist scholars. Shinran ignored the traditional way of reading the sentence, and he came up with his unique way of reading it. This sentence, this one sentence in the larger sutra says, "On the basis of good merits, I attain birth in the Pure Land." Let me read this sentence again. "On the basis of good merits, I attain birth in the Pure Land." On the basis of good merits, I attain birth in the Pure Land. Concerning the words in this sentence, see, the good merits, concerning the words good merits in this sentence, Shinran Shonin and other scholars have totally different understanding. Before Shinran Shonin, all scholars read this sentence this way: "On the basis of the good merits that I have accumulated, I attain birth in the Pure Land." On the basis of the good merits that I have accumulated, I attain birth in the Pure Land. This was considered the traditional and standard way of reading the sentence. This traditional way of reading means that the practitioner should accumulate good merits, and on the basis of the good merits that he has accumulated, he attains birth in the Pure Land. But Shinran Shonin didn't read the sentence that way. He read the sentence this way: "On the basis of the good merits that Amida Buddha has given me, I attain birth in the Pure Land." He said, "On the basis of the good merits that Amida Buddha has given me, I attain birth in the Pure Land." Shinran was the only person who read this sentence this way. For the traditional Buddhists before Shinran, the good merits were those that the practitioner had to accumulate. And on the basis of his merit, the practitioner attains birth in the Pure Land. But Shinran read, "On the basis of the good merits that Amida has given me, I attain birth in the Pure Land." This way, Shinran understood the sentence in a totally different way. And Shinran is saying, "Thanks to Amida's merits, I attain birth in the Pure Land." Since Shinran Shonin had a deep insight into his evil and ignorant nature of his being, he could not say that he could engage in good good practices. He could not say that he could accumulate good merits. So he couldn't say on the basis of good merits that I have accumulated. He couldn't say that. But he said that in spite of his incompetence, he was receiving wonderful merits. He said that the merits that he was receiving from Amida Buddha was so wonderful and powerful that they enabled him to attain birth in the Pure Land. Since Amida Buddha is a symbol. Okay? Since Amida Buddha is a symbol for Shinran's teachers, Shinran was saying in this sentence that the wonderful merits he was receiving from his teachers were so powerful and wonderful that they enabled him to attain birth in the Pure Land. He was saying that the wonderful teachings and the guidance that he was receiving from his teachers were so wonderful and powerful that they enabled him to attain birth in the Pure Land. Here we can see that Shinran was reading Buddhist texts in a very subjective way. And many scholars criticize Shinran for doing this. They said Shinran was reading text in such an arbitrary way. But Shinran wasn't interested in the academic and standard interpretation of the text. He was interested in knowing what the text was telling him. He wanted to know what aspect of his being was revealed by the text. Now I want to give you the third and the last example. I want to talk about how Dr. Iwao Hosokawa, Dr. Hosokawa is a modern Shin teacher. Actually, he was a chemistry professor. And let me talk about how he read a Buddhist story. In one of his lectures, Dr. Hosokawa talks about the story of a tiger and three princes. Tiger and three princes. This story goes like this. Once upon a time, there were three princes. One day they went out for a picnic in a mountain. In the mountain, they bumped into a mother tiger that was lying on the ground. She was so emaciated that she could even stand up, and her 5 cubs surrounded her. When the three princes saw the tiger and the cubs, each prince expressed their respective ideas. First, the oldest prince said, "Good, the tiger is so emaciated. Let's kill her. The skin of tiger is precious. Let's capture these 5 cubs and let's sell them. We can make money." The second oldest prince said, how sad it is to see a starving tiger. Let's give her our lunch. She will regain her strength and she will be able to nurse her babies. Then the third, the youngest prince said, giving our lunch is not good enough. To save her and the cubs, I want to offer my arm to her. So he cut his arm with a sword and offered the bloody arm to the tiger. Then the tiger licked the blood and ate the arm. When the tiger regained her strength, she jumped at the youngest prince and devoured him. The other 2 princes, scared, just ran away. That's the end of the story. How do you read this story? How do you read this story? I'm sure you understand that this story shows 3 different degrees of compassion, 3 different levels of compassion. I think that is the general and standard way of reading this story. When we read this story that talks about three princes and the tiger, with whom do we identify ourselves? With whom do we identify ourselves? Probably we would identify ourselves with the oldest prince or with the second oldest prince. Although we cannot identify ourselves with the youngest prince, we would admire the extraordinary compassion he had toward the tiger. That's the way we read the story. That seems like a standard way of reading. Then, how does Dr. Hosokawa read? How does he read this story? After telling this story in one of his lectures, Dr. Hosokawa asks himself, with whom do I identify myself? With whom do I identify myself? Then he says, I think that I am the mother tiger who devoured the compassionate prince. I think I'm no different from her. I've received so much from my teachers. I have received so many wonderful things from my teachers, from my friends, and from my parents. But I am so ungrateful, so ungrateful. I'm not different from this tiger who devoured the prince, who did such a wonderful thing for her. I'm no different from the tiger who devoured the prince without even saying thank you. Dr. Hosokawa reads this story as a text that shows the reality of himself. He reads it as a text that shows that he is an extremely ungrateful person. Here I can see that Dr. Hosokawa is a student of Shinran Shonin. Dr. Hosokawa has learned from Shinran that he should read a Buddhist text subjectively to know the reality of the self. He learned from Shinran that he should read the Buddhist text as a mirror that shows the reality of his being. Now let me conclude my talk. I've discussed how our Buddhist teachers read Buddhist scriptures. Although some people may consider that there is a fixed and standard way of reading Buddhist scriptures, we may think that people may think there's a standard way of reading a Buddhist text. I don't think so. Our Buddhist teachers were not satisfied with reading text in the so-called general, objective, and standard way. They are not interested in reading text objectively, merely as a source of information. They read text for the sole purpose of examining the self. They read them as a mirror that reflected and showed what they were. They were always asking, what is this text teaching me? What aspect of my life is this text showing me? They never forgot this subjective position. We could compare a Buddhist text to a drum. A drum does not have any fixed or standard sound. A drum could give different sounds depending on how we hit it. If we hit the drum softly, we have soft sound. If we hit it hard, we receive a big sound. we can say the same thing about a Buddhist text. If we ask a shallow question to a Buddhist text, then the text will return a shallow answer. If you ask a heavy question, deep question to a Buddhist text, then text will return a deep answer. Deep answer. There is no objective or standard teaching in any Buddhist teaching. Just like our hitting determines the nature of the sound we receive, the degree of seriousness determines the nature of the teaching we receive from a Buddhist text. The more self-reflective we become, the more self-reflective teaching we receive from a Buddhist text. If our subjective and self-reflective position is established, we could receive wonderful teachings, not only from books, but also from all things, from all the people and things in this world. We can learn about the nature of our being from all the people and all the things in this world. This morning, I've talked about how our Buddhist teachers read Buddhist scriptures. In the initial stage of learning Buddhism, it is perfectly all right for us to read a text as a source of objective and general information. It's okay to do that in the initial stage of learning Buddhism. But as we deepen our understanding of Buddhism, we must know that Buddhism is nothing but a teaching of self-examination. Self-examination. We must read the text subjectively as a mirror that is showing us what we really are. We must ask, what is this text teaching me? What aspect of my being is this teaching revealing me? We are so fortunate. We are so fortunate to have many wonderful teachers, such as Zendo, Shinran, and modern teachers, such as Dr. Hosokawa. They show us how we should read Buddhist text. From them, we must learn the subjective and authentic way of reading Buddhist text. Thank you very much.